Alright guys, now in this part of your video series, we're going to go through and take this from its dry state where we just assembled it, and we're going to finally kind of like process this thing to the point where we can clean it up, make sure our edges are nice and even. Right now they're not even close. They're off by a long shot. It's really noticeable, especially like right here. That's terrible. We can't leave that as is. So we want to clean up all these edges, the long sides and the short sides, and eventually we're going to go through around the corners and a little bit in a few minutes, as well as we're going to go through and take this through the router table to take these edges and round them over. So one of the first steps, you want to open up one of these vices, and please use the wooden draw vices, these guys right here. Don't use the metal ones, they can damage your wood. We're going to be worrying about these long edges here, the one on the front as well as the one on the back. We got to take those and smooth them out to the point where they're nice and even. So we want to tighten this down, make sure it's nice and snug, but don't clamp it down to the point where you actually break it and hear it crack, because that's just putting way too much stress on here. But this thing has to be nice and still so it doesn't move anywhere. So the next thing we're going to be using is this thing here called a plane, or sometimes they call it a block plane. Come in different sizes. I have approximately in my room 5 that you guys can use. What a block plane is used for, it shaves off small, like paper thin amounts of wood at a time, and it can be used for doors, maybe shaving out small pieces of wood, making surfaces nice and even. But the way it works, it has a blade that kind of pops out at the very bottom. There's like a little chute here. The blade pops out, and as this flat surface travels along your work area, it starts to shave off one small little bit at a time. So that's going to be our goal, taking this and shaving across to get this nice and even. So you're going to need to grab yourself one of these guys here, as well as probably a square. So I'd probably suggest taking this in both hands, and you're going to start just a few inches in from the end, not at the very end. And you can either hold this straight or somewhat at a small little angle. Don't push down hard or else it grabs too much. Keep it nice and straight. You would just slide it across, and it's going to chip away and smooth away small little bits at a time, just like so. Every now and then it's probably helpful just to dump it out, get rid of the chips. And you probably want to take your finger and just check to see the smoothness on the very top here. So every now and then, don't go too crazy, but you want to take a square, and you want to check for squareness to make sure that you're nice and even the whole way across. So right now my middle is pretty square, but as soon as I get out to the edge here, and I hold this, it's kind of hard to see on camera, but there's a little bit of daylight that shows through here, which means that there's a high spot on this side. So if it's low on this side, and high on this side, that means that we need to take some off on the high side. So we'll put this back in the clamp and just keep working it until it's nice and straight and smooth. You got to be careful though, because it's very easy to get this thing off on a severe angle, either this way, or I've even seen it where people start to angle it like this way to the point where it starts to curve like that. You got to be careful with those. So once you get done with one side, it's helpful to loosen up the vise. This side's nice and even and straight. We checked it. We're going to flip it over and do the opposite side, same thing. Go nice and slow. If you go too quick, you run the chance of snapping a piece off. Same process. Go through, smooth it out, check it with a square, and try to get it nice and even. Alright guys, with the next step, we got our our long edges nice and smooth using the block plane. Now we have to focus on these ends here. You shouldn't go through and use a block plane on these ends, and it is possible, but I prefer you not. So what we would like to do is take these ends, which you can see they're off by a lot. Specifically this side, you're off probably by almost like I'd say an eighth, and it almost like steps up. We want to take these and just sliver them off and trim them down using the radial arm saw to make them nice and even. This is the quickest and easiest way to do this in my room. So what you want to do, make sure the machine's turned off, take one of your ends, it doesn't matter which one, and we're going to sliver it off. Take your piece of wood, put it against the fence, slide it over, and we want to be taking off just a sliver. So wherever the lowest one is, we want to sliver it off and maybe just touch the blade just a little bit right to that edge and push it back and hold it in place. Next, we want to take the $1 million stick, the $10 million stick, place it on top, push down to apply pressure. When you're making this cut, you got to go a lot slower because we're cutting through a much thicker piece of wood. You have to practice some control in here, so pull back very slowly and pull it toward yourself very slowly and control it. If you pull too fast, it will actually stop the blade, which is not good. So you'll turn the machine on and slowly pull back toward yourself. For the next part of your project, we want to take these corners and just round them off. It creates just a nicer look and overall effect to everything. So it doesn't matter if you're tracing on the top or the bottom. I have one of these templates. Now, these I made them a long time ago. So we're not really worried about how wide yours is compared to the template, like your board or your projects of the template. But all we're worried about is lining up two edges, the side and the end. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our pencil and trace out these corners. We will be rounding those over in just a few seconds here, or moments, with the disc sander. So trace out all four. Alright guys, now for this next part, what we're going to be doing is taking all of our corners and rounding them over. Pretty simple, but this is a thing that you can screw up if you're not careful. So the first thing we're going to do, you'll see in a few seconds here, I'm going to take off the majority of that wood there on the corner. And last thing I'm going to do, I won't quite put the whole piece of wood against like this. You never want to do that. I don't care if it's this long side or the short side, but it's going to be pretty close, but there's going to be a gap on this side. And to get that nice finished curve, we're going to start pretty close and just barely pull this thing around like this, applying light pressure until you get to the end and there's a small little gap on the other side. And I'll show you guys what I mean here in a few seconds. Alright guys, so if you take a look pretty closely, you can see it's a really nice profile. It's nice and round, and I went through that process of just at the very end, after I got all the wood kind of sanded off, I went through and I just barely pushed and applied pressure and sanded a nice even radius. This is exactly what you want to see on your project. Alright folks, so our next stop on this little visit of our project, we're going to go through and we're going to use this right here called the router table. We're going to use it, and it has a round over bit in it. To round over all of our edges. We have 8 total edges we want to round over. 4 on the top side, you flip it over, 4 on the bottom side. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. Just a few things when you're running your piece of wood through, like we talked about during the safety videos and the safety test. Take your piece of wood, it's got to go against the fence, and you're going to run it from the right side to the left side. A nice even speed, so I'd say about this speed right here is acceptable. Also, take your fingers and scrunch them up. When you slide them across, you don't want your fingers overhanging the edges or over the very top, because if you slip, your finger's going to go right in there and it's going to be game over, not pretty for you. Go through and do each side. After you get done one side, flip, do the other side, and you just continue on through. Just make sure the vacuum's connected and on when you're using this machine. Just keeps things a lot cleaner and nicer. Alright guys, so if you take a look, we're just at the router table, and we went from a square edge to now it's rounded over. And we did all 8 on all sides. The only thing that's unfortunate is I don't really prefer that you do the corners over there. It's not exactly safe for you guys to use my class, and I'd rather you use a file to clean those up. So the next step, we're going to be using a file to kind of taper off these corners and make it look like we went the whole way around with the router itself. Alright, so we're going to take the file and we're just going to move around and take care of this corner here. And there's going to be a total of 8. So remember, there's 2 sides, 1, 2, and then there's 3, 4, and then there's going to be 4 on the other side as well. So it's a pretty easy process. Take your file, just go downwards like this, and try to keep it moving around, and change like different angles at what you're sanding and filing. And your goal is to make it look pretty close to the point where that router bit went the whole way around the corner. So we're going to do that a total of 8 times. Alright guys, so one of the very last things you want to do to your project, we want to go through, and at this point we want to make sure that we know who this belongs to. So we're actually going to use the metal stamps that you might have used last year, or even in 6th grade when you made the Scoop project, to put your name on here, because from here on out we want to get rid of any imperfections, like any dirt marks, especially pencil lines. They, at this point, gone. Got to be out of here. So we're going to use metal stamps, which are in the woodworking cabinet, as well as the hammer too. So for the metal stamps, guys, what I would suggest doing, do your first name as well as your last initial. And it's also probably a good idea, I would actually prefer it if you put the year. So this year is 2019, so you're going to do a 2, 0, 1, and a 9. And I'm going to show you that process in a few seconds here. So what you'll do is pretty simple. In order to do this correctly, it doesn't matter which way it's facing on the bottom of your project, but we want to do it on the bottom, not the sides or the top, the bottom, because the bottom you won't really see, and it's going to be concealed when you put it straight down. So remember, just a quick review from 6th grade or maybe even last year, you got to make sure the groove is facing towards you, or I like to put it in my thumb. That way you're going to have a letter or number facing the correct way. The only exception would be the number 9. If you want a 6, you turn it the opposite direction. You put it right on top of the piece of wood, take a hammer, and you got to give it a nice solid strike. Nothing too crazy, but if you do it too light, like that, nothing's going to show up. A nice heavy strike. Just like that, and it should bounce. If you do it correctly, you should have like a nice deep impression like that. And you want to do that for your first name, and remember your last initial as well as the year 2019 or whatever the year it is. Alright guys, for one of the last steps we got going on here, we're almost done. We actually want to surface or sand these 2 surfaces. We have the bottom and the top. Only the bottom and the top, nothing else. I don't want to see you sanding the edges, corners, or ends, or sides. Just the top or bottom. We're going to be using this thing here called, some people call it a power sander. It's a random orbital sander, that's the real name for it. It actually has a piece of sandpaper on the very bottom. They come in different grits, and it's stuck on there like Velcro. So if you have one that's kind of already used up, you can take it off. Or if one looks like it's used up like this one, seen its fair share of use, but it's still good. But if it's completely white, we can get you a new one. Just let me know and I will change it out for you. So this spins around and vibrates, and it just takes the sanding process and speeds it up so much quicker. And remember, we're only doing the top and the bottom surface, nothing else. So our project piece doesn't go anywhere. Open up the vise. We want to clamp it down. We're going to open it up, and don't put it the whole way down so it's nice and flat and even. You actually want to have it so it's raised up and above the table surface area. If you put it too far down, you're actually going to sand the table and the vise, and you're not going to sand your project. So clamp it down so it doesn't move anywhere. Alright, so the next step, guys, you want to unwind the power cord, take this thing off, and you want to get it to the point where you're ready to plug this thing in. And you can use one of my power sources in the room. Usually I have like drop cords like this guy right here that you can use. There might be some tables that have cords as well. You can use whichever one that you want. It really doesn't matter to me. Just pick a power source and then just go with it. You turn the power on by flipping this switch on. And usually I like to hold it with 2 hands. One hand around the base like this, the other hand on top. And all you do is hold it nice and flat, and you just go back and forth. That's it. And it takes only a matter of seconds to sand your project. Once you get one side done, loosen up the vise, flip it over, do the other side. Same exact thing. So when you're done with the sander, I just ask that you please wrap it up, put it back where it belongs. I usually keep them over near the power hand drills. But before you call it quits, just do a visual inspection of the top surface and the bottom surface. Your goal is, not only do you want to make it nice and smooth, but any pencil lines, dirt, blemishes, anything, they got to disappear. If it's left over now, and let's say you stain it, it's going to show up like a sore thumb, like a highlighter over a piece of white paper. So make sure you check both sides. So to my untrained eye, these look pretty good. So once you get to this point, your next step is just going to be taking some regular sandpaper, going through the process of sanding with medium, then fine, until this thing is as smooth as glass. Alright guys, very last thing and part of your project, we just want to sand these corners and edges and the sides. You should not have touched these with the orbital sander because that'll actually damage it. We just do big flat surfaces with that. We're going to start out, and as always with the sanding process, you start with a medium sandpaper, which usually is a lower grit, so this is 80 grit. And it looks a little bit darker, and sometimes it says coarse on the back side. And then after we're done with that, and after we sand the whole entire thing down, then we go over to the fine grit. So I might have like anywhere between 120 or 220, depending on what's in the container. You can also, if available, I have these sanding blocks you can use as well. If the paper's ripped, just go get a new one. I try my best to kind of like, if they're ripped, kind of like refill them and make them better. But just don't bring these to me and kind of get my face with that. So you're going to go through, and I expect you to sand every part of this project. The only thing you're not really sanding is, of course, the very inside where you can't really reach anymore. But you're going to go through, take the sandpaper, sand the whole thing down. This is going to be a long process. It's literally probably going to take you at least a whole entire class period to sand and do this correctly with the 80 grit, the medium, and then the fine, which is like maybe like the 180 or 220, depending on what I have in there. Sand everything down. And after you get done with one grit, like the medium, bring it to me. I want to check it. After I give you the thumbs up and everything's good, you're going to go through to the fine grit, sand the whole thing all over again, and then your last stop is you're going to check with me. After I give you the thumbs up, then finally I'll give you permission to go through, and you have a choice. You can either stain your project or you can paint it. It's up to you. You make that decision, and there's going to be a video you watch later on for that process. But overall, this is what your project should look like after you've manufactured it, put it together, and smoothed it out.